Okay, so it gives me great pleasure to talk to you today about OSAI, the Open Source Accessibility Initiative that Orange has heralded within OW2. Obviously, this is an initiative that really exemplifies the strategy that Orange has around open source and how it can drive innovation. And it's an initiative that aligns perfectly with the accessibility strategy as created and as managed by the Group Accessibility Department, headed by François-René Germain. It's been a journey over the last 18 months to create this initiative. And so I thought what I'd do today is, rather than kind of tell you directly about the initiative, is maybe talk about that journey as we hear about the challenges of open source. It's a journey that's really been difficult, challenging, exciting, but it's also shown the different powers of open source to bring the different people together, different people of different backgrounds, whether those are passionate open sourcers, people who are awe-inspiring accessibility experts, developers, people from marketing, people from HR, people from many different teams throughout the Orange organization, but also, of course, throughout the global world of open source. And of course, it's thanks, before we go forward into the slides, it's thanks to a number of key people who have played an active part in the creation of this initiative. So first of all, a thank you to the accessibility teams within Orange, notably Sylvie Huber, Stéphane Duchamp, Gilles Zanolian, Denis Chen, Olivier Ducroux as well. So a big thank you for them. Also a big thank you to the DINSIC. The DINSIC is the French IT department of the French government, who were a very keen and active supporter of what we did, who recognized early on that open source can be a key way of furthering their accessibility drivers, but also a key way of responding to their political driver, which is to have open governance. Okay, so you've started to get a feeling from some of the other presentations that accessibility is kind of a big topic, right? Not just in scope, because obviously we're talking about problems and difficulties around visual or cognitive or physical, auditory, etc. But in terms of numbers, I mean, if we, Microsoft mentioned this point as well. If we look at just the pure numbers around people who are impacted around accessibility, it's 22% of the US population, as recognized by the CDC. That's 63 million people. Globally, that's 1 in 7 people, or 1 billion people around the world. And these are like big numbers. And these are numbers that are going to increase with the changing demographics. So obviously we're in a world that's changing. We have a huge audience here. And those changes, oh, there's some animation. Those changes are also in parallel to the fact that the world in which we live in terms of the tools that we use, the way we organize our work, the way we organize our social interactions, the way we organize our lives generally, are undergoing some fundamental changes as well. The world is transforming. Digital technologies are transforming the world in which we live in. Now, I think that brings us to a fundamental question, which is something that was touched on earlier this morning, around the ethics of what we do. And the fundamental question here around the digital transformation is, do we want a digital transformation that truly fosters increased inclusion? Or do we want a digital transformation which is a motor to disparity and exclusion, with some people being left behind? Now, obviously, I think we all know when we ask a question like that, I think the answer is fairly obvious. And ICT, so computer technologies, digital technologies, have an enormous power to transform the world, societies and economies, in the way that benefits everyone. Now, if we look at open source is, you guys are mainly from open source worlds here in the audience, so you know that open source is changing the technologies that we use. And in fact, it's driving most of the technologies we use today, apart from the internet, where we saw open source being fundamental to the creation of the World Wide Web, from the Apache browser, the Apache servers, Mozilla browser, etc. We also see today open source as a driver behind the cloud, the Internet of Things, connected objects, big data, as a service platforms, network virtualization, development tools. If we look at network virtualization, obviously for a telco like Orange, this is a crucial aspect. It's a transformation which is absolutely revolutionary in the world of telecommunications. And open source is an enabler of these changes, which is fantastic. Okay, so as I said, you guys are all open source, I like to say magicians, the open source sorcerers. So hats off, because you have been the people who have been driving these changes, and you're the people who will continue to drive these changes. So you play a critical part in the world that's coming up. And you know better than me. You know the benefits from open source. You know how open source can drive this kind of collaboration dynamics, can drive and enhance code quality through peer review, how it can enable us to have better control over our roadmaps, over our vendor sourcing strategy, freedoms. We had the word earlier today, right? So open source has some key benefits. But it's not always been easy, and it's still a difficult subject, right? Convincing people to go the open source way requires a deep cultural shift in the way we think and in the way organizations think. Licenses are still a question that rear their head, and people ask the question, how do we handle these licenses? And of course we have to handle them. It's not the Wild West. The way that open source as a strategy for delivering new innovations impacts a commercial strategy and the IPR strategy around that. These are critical questions that we have to ask and answer continuously. So the use of open source, regardless of its benefits, is still a question that is not easy. It's still something that we struggle with within organizations of many sizes. But we see time and time again that open source brings benefits. We see new startups using open source as part of their innovation cycle to go quicker, maybe to have less expense on the licensing during that innovation phase. Whatever the reasons are, small startups are using open source to drive innovation, but we're seeing the bigger companies, the Microsofts of the world, also turn into open source. So there has to be kind of a reason for this, right? And that's the benefits. It doesn't change. Okay, so we see that the world is changing. We see there are demographic changes. We see there is a digital change, a digital transformation. And we see that there are clear benefits around open source. But of course, there are clear benefits around accessibility and having a real inclusion. So accessibility and open source, these are very much an opportunity for companies, very much an opportunity for us to be a part of a good digital innovation, ethics going in the right way. It's also a means of touching a larger audience, a means of managing potential legal risks. Obviously, you probably know that there are laws around accessibility in terms of accessible web services when you're having a public platform, or accessible work environments for your employees. I'm sure you know as well that various public sector marketplaces increasingly have accessibility as their criteria within the RFI, RFP processes. And generally, the accessibility audience itself is a large number. We saw the numbers earlier. So there's a real opportunity here. Now, how and why did Orange create the Open Source Accessibility Initiative? Okay, obviously we've seen some of the benefits and we've seen kind of a logic behind it, but where do we come from on this? Well, Orange has always had a strong open source commitment and a strong open source strategy. It's something we're committed to be an active partner within open source. We don't want to be seen as just a kind of a user saying thank you very much. We want to be active in the communities. And for a number of years, we've had an open source governance which promotes the use of open source within the group, fosters collaboration in the wider ecosystems, and of course, ensures that we play the game correctly, ensures that we respect licenses, ensures that we contribute back. And it was about 2 years ago that we saw 2 projects go through our internal compliance process, and 2 projects focused on accessibility. And for me, that set off a train of thought, which was, well, if we have projects going out on open source, there's only really one reason to be publishing a project out on open source. It's because we want people to feed back on those projects. We want people to use the projects, feedback, give us ideas, join in, etc. So it seemed a logical exercise to say, rather than having these 2 projects lost in GitHub, we will try to organize them so there's some kind of unified space for these 2 projects, for people to come in and say, okay, projects on accessibility, open source, organized by Orange, wow, okay, cool, we're going to join in on that, we're going to use them, we're going to feed back information, fantastic. And then, of course, you sit down for 30 seconds, if that, and you think, well, hang on, if we're trying to have a collaboration space around open source, and around these accessibility projects, it doesn't really make any sense to have this as an Orange branded exercise, because the whole notion of open source is that anyone can join in, and we would like other participants to join in, but we'd also like other participants to propose their own projects. So that's where we very quickly jumped from, here are some left alone projects going out on open source, to we will create an initiative around accessibility that fosters a real community around this subject. We want to encourage the collaboration, bring in the wider ecosystems, and we know that resources are constrained within teams, especially accessibility teams, and so we want to, at all costs, avoid reinventing the wheel. We've heard of frameworks, we've heard of page testers for accessibility. I suspect there's multiple versions of page testers for accessibility. How can we all work together so that we can truly create a new innovation rather than continually the same thing? So where are we today with this journey, this 18-month journey that started, well, 18 months ago? Of course, OW2 have been a fantastic help creating this community. Not long ago, we released a charter, so a good governance charter, because we wanted it to be a community that was properly governed and properly organized. So we had a charter. We drew up a charter with the different parties that were starting to be interested last year. We've created an initiative that organizes discussions, research, projects, etc., around 7 domains. We've already attracted 18 participating organizations, coming from 5 different countries, mainly France at the moment, but also Italy, Switzerland, the UK, even India. And I know we're tracked as well by people in the US. We have a growing presence on Twitter. We've released our first project through to the OW2 marketplace. And this is a new initiative that only really went live in the last few months. So where are the challenges next? What's coming up? The real challenges now around this initiative, and I guess as open source people you probably understand these challenges, is It's one thing to have an open source community, it's one thing to have an open source project, but having true collaboration on those projects, that's a real challenge. So bringing our participants into true collaboration, deepening the collaboration, deepening the sharing, that's a real challenge that we're starting to attack now. And the next and the second major challenge for us is to expand our horizons. So we have these 18 participating organizations within various countries. We want to expand that. We want to have more organizations, more countries. We know we have a unique opportunity. There's no other open source initiative that we know of that's broadly based around accessibility. So it's we call for you, we call for the people here in the audience today and the people who might watch this on streaming later to come and join this initiative. Many discussions, I think really some cool advantages. I know people are now even starting to look at, for example, machine learning and accessibility. So it's a snowball effect that we've already started to see happen. And we welcome all new people of all new domains, whether they're IT people, HR people, accessibility people, French, English, American, Chinese, globally. And we hope that we will see you again in a year and have an even more dynamic and a great advance to show you. So that's the Open Source Accessibility Initiative. 18 months, a real journey, fantastic support from OW2, and I hope you guys also have fantastic support from OW2 like us, because it's clearly a true benefit. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Christian.